The photograph was supposed to be nothing more than a charming relic: sepia smiles, stiff collars, a wicker hamper resting on a checkered blanket. A 1915 family picnic, sun-dappled and ordinary in every imaginable way. That was how it looked at first glance on the historian's desk, the edges brittle with age, the inked caption on the back barely legible. But as the lamplight shifted and the image caught a deeper contrast, something else surfaced, something that hadn't been visible before. Behind the smallest child, half hidden by the tree lean, stretched a shadow too tall, too sharp, too wrong to belong to any person present. It didn't touch the ground quite right. Its shape seemed caught mid-motion, as if it had noticed the camera a moment too late. The historian stared longer than he meant to. The family's bright expressions began to feel strained, their posture oddly tense for people enjoying a quiet afternoon outdoors. The more he looked, the more the shadow seemed to thicken, darkening with each pass of his gaze. He blinked. For a heartbeat, just one, he could have sworn the shadow leaned closer to the child. Outside his window, the woods pressed against the glass in a dense black wall, though he could have sworn it had been clear daylight only minutes earlier. And still, on the desk before him, that impossible figure watched from the edge of a century-old frame, patient and blurred, as though waiting to be noticed properly for the very first time. The discovery begins quietly, with a local historian sorting through a donated box of belongings that once belonged to a long-forgotten family. His days are filled with such tasks, cataloging faded receipts, reading brittle letters, brushing dust off trinkets no one has touched in decades. Nothing in his routine suggests that this box will be any different. Yet, as he lifts a stack of curled papers, a photograph slips out and falls onto the table with a whisper-soft sound. He picks it up, expecting another stiff portrait or uneventful landscape, and instead finds himself staring at a 1915 family picnic frozen in a warm, sunlit moment. At first glance, the image radiates charm. A mother seated gracefully on a blanket, a father standing proudly behind her, two older children huddled close in playful pose, and the youngest, no more than 3 years old, sitting cross-legged with a toy clutched in hand. The setting is idyllic, tall trees arching overhead, soft summer light filtering down, touches of shadow that give the entire scene a gentle, nostalgic glow. It's ordinary, almost comfortingly so. But as he tilts the photograph under his lamp, something faint shifts into view. A dark shape just behind the smallest child catches his eye. At first, he attributes it to poor exposure, perhaps a smudge or the shadow of a tree trunk. Yet a quiet discomfort stirs when he leans closer. The darkness does not behave like a natural shadow. Its outline is too pronounced, its edges too crisp against the soft blur of the background. Worse, its shape seems strangely vertical, as though cast by something, or someone, standing closer than anything else in the frame. Curiosity begins to replace routine. He adjusts the lighting, bringing the photograph nearer to the bulb. With each minor shift, the dark figure appears to respond, its form subtly reshaping in ways that are impossible to attribute to the aged print. He turns the image slightly, and for the briefest moment, the shadow seems to align itself again, almost correcting its posture, as though it is determined to remain visible no matter how he tries to dismiss it. A faint chill crawls up his arms. Countless photographs have passed through his hands, but none have held this kind of quiet defiance, this sense that something within the frame is waiting to be recognized. What began as a simple archival task starts to feel like an intrusion into a moment that desperately wanted to remain buried in the forgotten corners of time. Efforts to trace the family begin with simple curiosity. After noticing the strange shadow in the photograph, the historian decides to learn more about the people captured in it. Usually, families from the early 1900s leave behind a trail that can be followed: birth certificates, land records, census entries, newspaper mentions, even handwritten notes tucked between old belongings. Such traces create a kind of paper silhouette, a way to understand who they were and how they lived. But when he starts searching for this particular family, the trail feels oddly faint from the very beginning, as if someone had been slowly erasing their footprints over time. The surname written on the back of the photograph is smudged but still readable. It's not an uncommon name, which initially gives the historian confidence. He begins with local archives, expecting to find the family recorded in the 1910 census. Strangely, their names appear only once, in a single entry, with no further details beyond the basic listing of household members. He assumes more records must exist somewhere: property deeds, school enrollments, even church registries. But each search turns up nothing. Every document he expects to find is either missing or never existed in the first place. He expands the search outward, hoping perhaps the family moved after 1915. There should be clues, sale records, forwarding addresses, announcements in local newspapers. Instead, he discovers a sudden void. It is as though the family simply vanished after the year stamped beneath the picnic photo. No deaths reported, no relocations, no legal transactions. The archives display a seamless continuation of community records, except for this family, whose presence abruptly dissolves into silence. The historian grows increasingly unsettled. He digs deeper, requesting access to older microfilm collections and storage cabinets rarely touched. Even there, he finds nothing beyond that one census entry and a single mention of the father working at a logging site. That brief note, dated 1914, stands as the last official trace of any of them. He cross-references nearby towns, searching for variations of the family's name, but each attempt circles back to the same uncertainty: they were here, and then they weren't. What troubles him most is the pattern this absence creates. Families of that era often suffered tragedies, but such events still left behind paperwork, death certificates, estate settlements, obituaries. This family, however, leaves no such echoes. The historian begins to feel that their disappearance isn't just a matter of lost files or poor record-keeping. It feels intentional, as if someone or something swept their existence clean, leaving behind only one surviving photograph and a faint whisper in the archives where their lives should have been. Local folklore surrounding the woods begins to seep into the historian's research almost by accident. While trying to gather context about the family's disappearance, he starts asking longtime residents about the area where the 1915 picnic took place. Most shrug or offer vague recollections, but a few older villagers react with an unease that feels disproportionate to a simple forest. Their voices lower, their expressions tighten, and they speak with the hesitance of people who fear giving shape to something by naming it. They don't tell stories so much as they give warnings, softly, reluctantly, about the thick stretch of trees that had, for generations, been treated with quiet caution. He visits the local library, where the village's small collection of regional tales is kept. The folklore section is thin, but one booklet stands out, filled with handwritten additions by different librarians over the decades. There, he finds fragmented accounts of a figure said to linger in those woods, appearing never fully in sight but always at the edge of one's perception. Hunters wrote of sensing someone behind them, only to turn and find nothing but branches swaying without wind. Children once claimed to see someone tall watching from between tree trunks, though none could describe a face. Travelers passing through recalled catching a shape in the corner of their eye, moving with a deliberate patience that made them hurry their steps without understanding why. These stories aren't dramatic or embellished like typical legends. Instead, they are strangely consistent, each one describing the same unsettling presence that never quite materialized into a full figure. The stories emphasize its peripheral nature, how it seemed to exist only where vision weakens, where shadows tangle just enough to suggest a form. It is not portrayed as malicious, yet the tone of the accounts carries an unmistakable dread, as though the figure's very existence was a warning in itself. The historian notices something else: all the stories share a peculiar detail about silence. People describe the woods becoming unnaturally still before sensing the figure, birds quieting mid-song, insects halting their drone, the air thickening as if listening. This silence was often followed by the softest impression of movement, never direct, never obvious, but enough to make the hairs on one's arms rise. The pattern is too distinct to ignore. As he reads deeper, the folkloric accounts begin to echo the uneasy feeling he had while studying the shadow in the picnic photograph. The figure in the woods, always half seen and never fully standing within the boundaries of vision, bears a disturbing resemblance to the elongated shape behind the child. Suddenly, the woods are no longer just a backdrop in the photograph but an active participant in the mystery, a place with a history of something watching from just beyond the reach of human sight. The decision to restore the photograph comes from a mix of curiosity and unease. The historian, unsettled by the strange shadow and the family's abrupt disappearance from public record, sends the image to a trusted colleague who specializes in photo restoration. The goal is simple: sharpen the details, clarify the background, and hopefully reveal the ordinary explanation hiding behind the unsettling shape. Old photographs often contain distortions caused by exposure issues, damage, or chemical fading, and he hopes this is one of them. For the first few days, he tries to reassure himself that the figure behind the child is nothing more than an illusion created by the camera's limitations. But when the restored image is returned to him, the results only deepen the mystery. The process, intended to correct imperfections, has instead intensified the shadow. Where the original print showed something vague and dark, the enhanced version reveals edges and contours that seem disturbingly intentional. The figure's outline appears sharper than anything else in the background, as though it possessed a clarity that time should have blurred, not strengthened. The historian examines the details slowly, expecting his eyes to adjust and find the logical source of the shape: a tree, a branch, a person partially hidden. Yet the more he looks, the less the shadow resembles anything from the natural world. He notices that the shape seems subtly different from what he remembers in the original photo. It is taller now, its silhouette narrower but more defined. The curvature of its upper portion suggests the faintest trace of a head-like form, though the lack of features makes it impossible to describe. For a moment, he wonders if his memory is simply playing tricks on him, but when he places the original and restored images side by side, a chilling realization sinks in: parts of the shadow appear to have shifted position. The slightest angling of the restored image makes it look as if the figure is leaning forward, closing the distance between itself and the child. At first, he assumes the restoration software caused some artifact or unintentional warping. But his colleague insists the enhancement was minimal, that no structural changes were made, only improved contrast and clarity. The historian tests the theory by adjusting the brightness himself, experimenting with different light levels. Each time, the shadow behaves strangely, gaining depth instead of dispersing, as though it feeds on the attention directed toward it. What unsettles him most is the sense that the shadow seems aware of being observed. The family in the photograph remains frozen in a cheerful moment, but the dark figure feels alive in a way the rest of the image does not. The picture begins to seem less like a static memory and more like a captured intrusion, a presence that was not meant to be revealed yet refuses to remain hidden. The discovery of the second photograph happens almost by accident. The historian, now deeply entangled in the mystery of the picnic photo, begins combing through regional archives, hoping to find anything that might confirm or disprove his suspicions. While searching a neighboring county's museum collection, he encounters an archivist who mentions, almost casually, that another family from the same era once captured something unusual in their own outdoor photograph. Intrigued and already on edge from recent findings, the historian asks to see it. The archivist retrieves a thin envelope, worn with age, and carefully slides out a photo taken in 1915, dated the very same day as the picnic image. This second photo shows a different family, unrelated by name or residence, gathered near a lake miles away from the original woods. They pose stiffly, the water shimmering behind them, the trees bending gently in the summer wind. Everything about it appears ordinary at first glance, but then the historian's pulse quickens. In the background, partly concealed behind the reeds, stands a dark vertical shape that mirrors the figure from the picnic photo. Its form is just as tall, just as unnaturally narrow, and once again positioned too close to the subjects for it to be a distant object. What strikes him most is the alignment of the shadow's stance, slanted slightly forward, the same faint lean he noticed after the restoration of the original image. The historian leans closer. The figure in this second photo lacks clear features just like the first, but its presence feels unmistakably deliberate. Unlike the picnic photo, where the shadow lurks behind the youngest child, this one stands further back, almost as if observing from a distance. Yet its outline seems slightly different, as though it adapted to its surroundings or shifted in form between the two moments. He checks the timestamp written on the back of the photos. Both were taken within hours of each other, one in the dense woods and the other beside a lake. The distance between the two locations makes the possibility of a person traveling between them, and appearing unnoticed in both, extremely unlikely. A sense of cold recognition settles over him. The archivist mentions that the family who took the lake photo later reported feeling watched during their outing, though they dismissed it as nerves and never connected it to anything supernatural. They had submitted the photograph years later only because they found the background figure peculiar and hoped for clarification. No one had ever found an explanation. The historian studies the two images side by side and feels the overlap like a pressure building behind his eyes. The same day, two different families, two different locations, one impossible figure appearing in both frames. The pattern is no coincidence, and whatever cast that shadow did not belong to either family or to the natural landscape surrounding them. The disappearance of the historian begins subtly, long before anyone realizes he is in danger. After discovering the second photograph and noticing the eerie consistency in the shadowy figure's shape, he becomes consumed by the mystery. His colleagues observe small changes at first. He grows quieter, more distracted, often staring at the two photographs for long stretches without blinking. He begins working late into the night, leaving lights on in the archive long after closing, poring over microfilm reels, public records, and personal diaries from families of that era. When asked whether he's making progress, he answers vaguely, as though his thoughts are elsewhere, pulled toward something he can't quite name. One evening, he calls his restoration colleague with a tremor in his voice. He insists something is wrong with the negatives of the picnic photo. He claims he saw movement in the background, just a flicker, barely perceptible, but enough to make him drop the film strip. His colleague laughs at first, thinking it a joke, but the historian doesn't laugh with him. He says the shape wasn't simply a shadow anymore, it seemed to be shifting, stretching, adjusting itself as though reacting to being watched. The call ends abruptly when the historian mutters that he needs to check something, and the line goes silent. Over the next few days, he stops answering messages. His office remains locked from the inside during hours when it should be open. Coworkers smell the faint scent of old paper and cold air seeping through the door, as though it has not been opened in days. When they finally convince security to unlock it, the room is empty. His coat is still hanging on the wall, his coffee mug half finished on the desk, and the photographs laid out carefully, side by side, as if he had been studying them moments before stepping away. But there is no sign of him, no note, no bags missing, no indication he intended to leave. What unsettles everyone who enters the room is how cold it feels, unnaturally so, as if the warmth has been drained from the air. One staff member insists the shadows in the corners seem darker than usual, heavy and thick despite the overhead lights. Another claims the photographs themselves have changed slightly, the dark figure appearing a shade darker or positioned differently than she remembered, though she cannot prove it. Rumors spread quickly. People whisper that perhaps the historian became too engrossed in the mystery and simply ran off in a fit of stress. Others admit, quietly, that they feel something else might have stepped into his life through those photographs, something that had been waiting on the periphery for far too long. The decision to return to the woods comes from a mixture of fear, determination, and a growing sense of obligation. After the historian's sudden disappearance, authorities conduct a minimal search, dismissing his vanishing as a personal choice or stress-induced breakdown. But one investigator, newly assigned to the case and unfamiliar with the town's unspoken rules, refuses to accept the easy explanations. She reviews the historian's notes, studies the 2 photographs he left behind, and feels the same unsettling pull he described. The shadowy figure in the images seems wrong in a way she cannot articulate, as if it doesn't belong to the era, the landscape, or even the logic of a captured moment. Something in the historian's last recorded message, his strained voice insisting the negatives were reacting, lodges in her mind like a splinter. Against the quiet warnings of locals, she heads to the place where the picnic photo was originally taken. The woods greet her with an almost suffocating stillness, the kind that feels less like nature resting and more like an audience awaiting something. The trees seem older than they should be, their trunks twisted in subtle, unnatural angles that make the path ahead look blurred or slightly distorted. She retraces the historian's steps with his handwritten notes in hand, following faded landmarks described in the margins. The deeper she walks, the more the air grows heavy, as though pressing inward, urging her to turn back. Eventually she reaches the approximate clearing where the family from 1915 once sat on their picnic blanket. The sunlight filters down in fractured beams, thin and weak despite the hour. She stands there for a long moment, imagining the family's laughter, the wicker basket, the innocent posture of the youngest child unaware of what stood behind him. She feels an inexplicable chill along her spine, a sensation of being observed from a vantage point she cannot locate. Determined, she begins searching the ground, brushing aside leaves and soil softened by time. Minutes turn into an hour before her fingers strike something solid. She digs carefully, expecting a rusted can or relic from a later decade. Instead, she uncovers an object wrapped in degraded cloth, its surface darkened by age. The wrapping crumbles at her touch, revealing what appears to be a wooden toy, the kind a child from 1915 might have clutched during a picnic. But the wood is wrong, too preserved, too untouched by time, as though it has been kept in conditions far different from the forest's natural decay. As she lifts the toy, the surrounding woods fall abruptly silent. The breeze stops. The birds quiet. Even the insects seem to withdraw. The air grows colder, and the shadows around her lengthen in ways that defy the direction of the sun. She tightens her grip on the toy, feeling the weight of it shift just slightly, as though something within it is awakening to her presence.